Eli. Hi, Vinny. Grandma's on to chapter 11. It's our last chapter. Like summer tempests came his tears. Okay. The rat put out a neat little brown paw, gripped Toad firmly by the scruff of the neck, and gave a great hoist and pull, and the waterlogged Toad came up slowly but surely over the edge of the hole, till at last he stood safe and sound in the hall, streaked with mud and weed to be sure, and with the water streaming off of him, but happy and high-spirited as of old, now that he found himself once more in the house of a friend, and dodging the invasions were over, and he could lay aside a disguise that was unworthy of his position and wanted such a lot of living up to. Remember, he has a washerwoman disguise on. Remember, right here. "Oh, Ratty," he cried, "I've been through such times since I saw you last. You can't think! Such trials, such sufferings, and all so nobly borne. Then such escapes, such disguises, such subterfuges, and all so cleverly planned and carried out. Been in prison? Got out of it, of course. Been thrown into a canal? Swam ashore. Stole a horse, sold him for a large sum of money. Humbugged everybody. Made 'em all do exactly what I wanted. Oh, I am a smart Toad, and make no mistake. What do you think my last exploit was? Just hold on till I tell you." "Toad," said the water rat, gravely and firmly, "you go off upstairs at once and take off that old cotton rag that looks as it might formerly have belonged to some washerwoman, and clean yourself thoroughly, and put on some of my clothes and try and come down looking like a gentleman if you can. For a more shabby, bedraggled, disreputable-looking object than you, I have never set eyes in my whole life. Now stop swaggering and arguing and be off. I'll have something to say to you later." Toad was first inclined to stop and do some talking back at him. He had had enough of being ordered about when he was in prison, and here was the thing being begun all over again, apparently, and by a rat, too. However, he caught sight of himself in the looking-glass over at the hat stand, with the rusty black bonnet perched rakishly over one eye, and he changed his mind and went very quickly and humbly upstairs to Rat's dressing-room. There he had thorough wash-up and brush-up, changed his clothes, and stood for a long time before the glass, contemplating himself with pride and pleasure, and thinking what utter idiots all the people must have been to ever mistaken him for a moment for a washerwoman. By the time he came down again, luncheon was on the table, and he was glad Toad was to see it, for he had been through some trying experiences and had taken much hard exercise since the excellent breakfast provided for him by the gypsy. While they ate, Toad told Rat all of his adventures, dwelling chiefly on his own cleverness and presence of mind in emergencies, and cunning in tight places, and rather making out that he had been having a gay and high-colored experience. But the more he talked and boasted, and the more grave and silent the rat became. When at last Toad had talked himself to a standstill, there was silence for a while, and then the rat said, "Now, Toady, I don't want to give you pain after all you've been through already, but seriously, don't you see what an awful ass you're making of yourself? On your own admission, you have been handcuffed, imprisoned, starved, chased, terrified out of your life, insulted, jeered at, and ignominiously flung into the water by a woman, too. Where's the amusement in that? Where does the fun come in? And all because you must needs go and steal a motor car? You know that you've never had anything but trouble from motor cars from the moment you first set eyes on one. But if you will mix up with them, as you generally are, 5 minutes after you've started, why steal them? Be a cripple. If you think it's exciting, be bankrupt for a change, if you set your mind on it. But why choose to be a convict? When are you going to be sensible and think of your friends and try to be a credit to them? Do you suppose it's any pleasure for me, for instance, to hear animals saying as I go about that I'm the chap that keeps company with gallow birds? Now, This very comforting point in Toad's character, that he was thoroughly good-hearted animal and never minded being jawed by those who were his real friends. And even when he most set up upon a thing, he was always able to see the other side of the question. So although while the rat was talking so seriously, he kept saying to himself mutinously, "But it was fun, though, awful fun," and making strange suppressed noises inside him, and other sounds resembling stifled snorts, or the opening of soda water bottles. Yet when the rat had quite finished, he heaved a deep sigh and said very nicely and humbly, "Quite right, Ratty. How sound you always are. Yes, I've been a conceited old ass. I can quite see that. But now I'm going to be a good toad and not do it anymore. As for motor cars, I've not been at all so keen about them since my last ducking in that river of yours. The fact is, while I was hanging on the edge of your hole and getting my breath, I had a sudden idea, a really brilliant idea, connected with motorboats. There, don't take on so, old chap, and stamp and upset things. It's only an idea, and we won't talk any more about it now. We'll have our coffee and a smoke and a quiet chat, and then I'm going to stroll gently down to Toad Hall and get into clothes of my own, set things going again on my old lines. I've had enough of adventures. I shall lead a quiet, steady, respectable life, pottering about my property and improving it and doing little landscape gardening at times. There will always be a bit of dinner for my friends when they come to see me, and I shall keep a pony chaise to jog about the country in just as I used to in the good old days, before I got restless and wanted to do things." "Stroll gently down to Toad Hall?" cried the rat, greatly excited. "What are you talking about? Do you mean to say you haven't heard?" "Heard what?" said the toad, turning rather pale. "Go on, Ratty, quick! Don't spare me! What haven't I heard?" "Do you mean to tell me," shouted the rat, thumping with his little fists upon the table, "that you've heard nothing about the Stouts and the Weasels?" "What? The Wild Wooders?" cried the toad, trembling in every limb. "No, not one word. What have they been doing? And how have they been taken Toad Hall?" continued the rat. Toad leaned his elbows on the table and his chins on his paws, and a large tear welled up on each of his eyes, overflowed and splashed on the table. Plop, plop. "Go on, Ratty," he murmured presently. "Tell me all. The worst is over. I am an animal again. I can bear it." When you got into that trouble of yours," said the rat slowly and impressively, "I mean, when you disappeared from society for a time over that misunderstanding about the machine, you know." Toad merely nodded. "Well, it was a good deal talked about down here, naturally," continued the rat, "not only along the riverside, but even in the wild wood. Animals took sides, as always happens. The river banker stuck up for you and said you had been infamously treated, and there was no justice to be had in the land nowadays. But the wildwood animals said hard things and served you right, and it was time this sort of thing was stopped. And they got very cocky and went about saying you were done for this time. You would never come back again. Never, never." Toad nodded once more, keeping silence. "That's the sort of little beast they are," the rat went on. "But Mole and Badger, they stuck out through thick and thin that you would come back again soon somehow. They didn't know exactly how, but somehow." Toad began to sit up in his chair again and to smirk a little. "They argued from history," continued the rat. "They said no criminal laws had ever been known to prevail against cheek and plausibility such as yours, combined with the power of a long purse. So they had arranged to move their things into Toad Hall and sleep there, and keep it aired, and have it ready for you when you turned up. They didn't guess what was going to happen, of course. Still, they had their suspicions of the wildwood animals. Now I come to the most painful and tragic part of my story. One dark night, it was a very dark night, blowing hard too, and the rain simply cats and dogs. A band of weasels armed to the teeth crept silently up the carriage drive to the front entrance. Simultaneously, a body of desperate ferrets advancing through the kitchen garden possessed themselves in the backyard and offices, while a company of skirmishing stouts who stuck nothing occupied the conservatory and the billiard room, and held the French windows opening onto the lawn. The mole and the badger were sitting by the fire in the smoking room, telling stories and suspecting nothing, for it wasn't a night for any animals to be out, when those bloodthirsty villains broke down the doors and rushed in upon them on every side. They made the best fight they could, but what was good? They were unarmed and taken by surprise, and what can 2 animals do against hundreds? They took and beat them severely with sticks, those 2 poor faithful creatures, and turned them out into the cold and wet, with many insulting and uncalled for remarks. Here the unfeeling toad broke into snigger, and then pulled himself together and tried to look particularly solemn. And the wild wooders that had been living in Toad Hall ever since, continued the rat, and going on simply anyhow, lying in bed half the day, and breakfast at all hours, and the place is such a mess, I'm told. It's not fit to be seen. Eating your grub and drinking your drink and making bad jokes about you, and singing vulgar songs about prisons and magistrates and policemen, horrid personal songs with no humor in them. And they're telling the tradespeople and everybody that they've come to stay for good. Oh, have they? Said Toad, getting up and seizing his stick. I'll jolly soon see about that. It's no good, Toad, called the rat after him. You better come back and sit down. You're only going to get into trouble. But the toad was off, and there was no holding him. He marched rapidly down the road, his stick over his shoulder, fuming and muttering to himself in anger, till he got near the front gate, when suddenly there popped up from behind the paling a long yellow ferret with a gun. Uh-oh, there he is right there. Who comes there? Said the ferret sharply. Stuff and nonsense, said Toad very angrily. What do you mean by talking like that to me? Come out here at once, or I'll... The ferret never said a word, but he brought up his gun to his shoulder. Toad prudently dropped flat in the road, and bing! A bullet whistled over his head. The startled Toad scrambled up to his feet and scampered off down the road as hard as he could. And as he ran, he heard the ferret laughing, and other horrid thin little laughs, taking it up and carrying on the sound. He went back, very crestfallen, and told the water rat. What did I tell you? Said the rat. It's no good. They've got sentries posted, and they're all armed. You must just wait. Still, Toad was not inclined to give up at once, so he got out the boat and set off rowing up the river to where the garden front of Toad Hall came down to the waterside. I think this might be a good place for us to stop, and we'll do the rest tomorrow. I love you, baby. Mwah!